Well, good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the City of York Council Planning Committee on Thursday, the 8th of September 2022. I have a number of apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Pavlovic, who has been substituted with Councillor Douglas, thank you. Councillor Luca and Councillor Crawshaw is substituting, and Councillor Barker, Councillor Fenton is substituting. Thank you to those who are here. As Councillor Pavlovic serves as Vice Chair of this committee, it is necessary that we appoint, at least for this meeting, a Vice Chair. Can I ask for any proposal as Vice Chair? That's seconded. Shall we just, by show of hands, I guess we're all happy with that. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking that role, Councillor Crawshaw. At this point of the meeting, members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interests they might have with regard to the business on hand this evening. If you've not already done so in advance on the register of interest, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. It is on my register of interest, but I'm a governor at Scarcroft School, and on reading the notes this morning, noticed that there is a potential for a 106 payment to go to Scarcroft School. That's the first I knew of it. I've had no part of it, but just for complete openness.
Councillor Doughty.
Thank you, Chair. It's just for transparency, really. As an employee on the railway, my employer's one of the tenants at Northern House. I don't see it as having any influence on my decision making.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I seek approval for the minutes of our planning committee held on the 4th of August? Councillor May?
I have a few points to raise, if that's all right. Some of them to do with accuracy and some of them to do with typos.
Fire ahead.
Great, thank you. Firstly, page 7, at the start of the summary of Kate Revilius's public participation, she was talking about some evidence, a document that she had prepared, and it says here undertaken by Helen Kane, but it doesn't say who that is. And I feel like for the benefit of people reading the minutes in the future, it'd be handy just to have it in there who Helen Kane is, seeing as they were quoted. She's a professional qualified access consultant and surveyor and director of Access Included.
Okay.
In all the bullet points, kind of some, I know that we don't, when it comes to public participation, we don't keep a, word for word record of exactly what was said, but seeing as there is a summary here, kind of highlighting the key points. In bullet point 1, the word involvement should come after community. It's a statement of community involvement.
Yep.
Bullet point 4, I feel didn't completely accurately describe what the member of the public was saying. She said that the officer with responsibility for the environmental impact assessment should have suitable training in the 4 areas of knowledge, sufficient information, timeliness, and real consideration. Bullet point 7, which is at the top of page 8, I read this over and over again and couldn't understand what this bullet point was saying, so I went back and checked the webcast, where it says it would be possible to have a walkway through the site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where there was a staff-only route. What the public speaker was referring to was on the plans, there is a staff route through the museum or around the museum or something. I read that sentence over and over again and couldn't really understand what it meant until I went back and read the webcast. I was just wondering if it could be a little bit clearer, maybe. Oh, my next note, actually, Councillor Crawshaw is here. I wasn't expecting him to be here. I'll leave you, because it's a summary of something you said, so I'll leave you to make sure the record is correct on that. And then the rest is typos, which I'll just email you if that's all right. At the bottom of page 13, it says, as part of the stopping up, a walkway agreement was approved. It wasn't in the scope of the stopping up, and it was only provided for information. It wasn't approved in any sort of way, actually quite the opposite. But in terms of the minutes, if that's in the decision notice, and I suppose including in if it's incorrect in the decision notice, I suppose it's not incorrect to record it in the minutes. I was gonna ask for
Comment
input
on
on that.
Sorry, I've kind of, can you say that again? Because I didn't quite get the beginning of what you said. So
The paragraph at the bottom of page 13, it's in the reasons for approval. The very bottom line says, as part of the stopping up, the walkway agreement was approved. That's not correct, but I suppose
that's on the decision notice.
it is on the decision notice.
yeah,
It's not
we can't
incorrect to
change.
record it in the minutes. It's,
Yeah, it's on the
yeah,
decision notice.
okay.
Yeah.
in that case, that was everything, but I'll put it all in writing for the benefit of the democracy officer.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of just points. One that's just a very straightforward point of accuracy. Page 9, just the second paragraph down, it says, at this point in the meeting, Councillor Crawshaw noted that his mother was chair. She's not chair, she's on the steering group of.
Okay.
Then on page 2, minute 16, second paragraph, if possible, I would just like to amend the wording to better reflect what was said. So what I'm proposing is that where it says Councillor Crawshaw recorded a strong objection to the reordering of the agenda, explained that he had informed the chair on Monday that week that he, and then I'd like to insert, was attending as substitute for Councillor Melly and only available for the National Railway Museum item in order to conclude the business from the last committee where this item was deferred, and then to delete, needed to leave the meeting early. Are you happy with that? Sorry?
You did say you had to leave early.
I didn't. I've watched it back. I was quite specific. So that wording is the wording that I said. I've taken
If you could
it
check the
verbatim.
Yeah.
And then again on page 10, there's a paragraph which is the point at which I left the meeting, which to be honest was a bit longer than I anticipated actually being recorded in the minutes. But since it's there, I would like to just. I've got a couple of amendments in terms of the wording just to make accuracy. I think, is it simpler for me to read out what I propose the minute should say, or?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Can I suggest we defer the acceptance of the minutes because I can't approve the minutes based on things that Councillor Melly may submit in writing after the meeting.
No.
Comments that Councillor Crawshaw's made that I may not agree with. I don't think we're going to get to a point of agreeing the
And then
minutes
signing
today.
minutes,
So I
yes.
think we suggest we defer the approval of the minutes to the next meeting.
I
At which
am
point
happy-
all of those issues can be submitted.
I am happy to circulate these if you wish. It was the last thing I did before I came to the meeting, and I've checked through and it's only verbatim changes to the wording.
Mm.
So I haven't added anything that I haven't said, or it's just in terms
Sure.
of the way that it's recorded,
But
it doesn't necessarily reflect what was said.
That's understood. But I suggest that we do indeed defer approving these minutes so we can bring those minutes, having taken account of the points, back to the next meeting of the planning committee.
Okay,
Yeah.
I do think it, because it was such a sensitive
And
issue, I do
given
think
the
it's
other points that were
important
made
that it's
earlier, these are
correct.
not just one or two typos. These are a number of points. Okay. Any others? Thanks very much. We don't have any members of the public registered to speak at this point in the meeting. So we can move on to the plans list, and we do indeed have one item this evening, item 4A, Northern House, Rougier Street. Could I ask you please to address any updates and the application?
I'll do the presentation first. So the full planning application for, I'm going to move this because if not, you're going to. Demolition of 1 to 9 Rougier Street, erection of a mixed-use development, including 158 apartments, offices, visitor attraction, a park hotel with 88 rooms with associated landscaping and public realm improvements. So this is your site, look in the red here. I'll just. My red pointer isn't working. What is there? So there's your red line of the site there. The existing site here, you can see here. And again, existing views here and here. And again, existing views from further out. We can just see the Grand Hotel next to it and the Aviva building here. So this is the landscaping plan of the new building. That's in the wrong position, hang on. So this is the basement plan along with the ground floor plan. These are probably in the wrong order. Let me go to these first. This is your elevations here. You can see this is the proposed new building here, along with these here. So the building, members may recall that this application was previously refused. The building has now been amended to be in 2 distinct blocks with a link in the middle. And again, these are your elevation plans that put it with a contextual in relation to the minster behind, as you can see, and the existing buildings within the vicinity. So this is an isometric drawing of the site. As you can see, as I've explained, it now sits in the 2 towers with the attraction that sits within the middle of the 2 and Rougier Street here, and the new attraction entrance to the rear. There you go. Is it by magic? This is the new attraction entrance here. And the elevation drawings. You will see some illustrative plans coming up, but as usual, I'd ask members to base their decisions based on the scale plans, which are these ones here. You can see the design from these, the proposals. And again, that's indicates whereabouts the application site, the outline of the proposed buildings there. And again, you can just see it here in relation to the existing buildings. And these are visualizations. Again, you need to base your recommendation on the scale plans, but these are the visualizations of how the buildings will sit in relation to the existing properties. So you can see this design is significantly different from the previously refused scheme. And again, further visualizations. And that's from down Rougier Street, looking up towards the walls down here. And again, from Rougier Street. That's looking up from the river towards the development. And again, in relation to the existing properties on Rougier Street here. And that's the end of the presentation. I'm just going to pass to Alison for the update.
Hello, members. It's Alison Stockdale, I'm Development Management Officer. So a couple of additional representations received since the report was written. One of these raised concerns that the BAT surveys were out of date. That was in the process of being rectified. So we now have the up-to-date BAT surveys, and you'll see in a minute that the ecology officer has commented on those. Also comments from a member of the public about the financial viability assessment in terms of publication of that. And you'll see at the back of these notes copies of emails between Becky and the member of the public explaining the position in relation to those financial viability appraisals and the independent summary, independent assessment that was taken, that took place of that appraisal. So additional consultations, conservation and design comments were in relation to revised plans that came in relatively recently, the ones you've seen up there. And in terms of the conservation officer, they didn't address her concerns about the scale of the scheme. The design officer, however, more happy. It was revisions in relation to the Tanner Row end of the scheme. So that'd be the right-hand side on that elevational plan you're seeing now, drawing the floors, kind of the middle floors back from Tanner Row to step the building back more, and that was considered more acceptable in design terms, although not to address heritage impact. Ecology officer was happy with the up-to-date BAT survey. There were no objections raised, and they suggested some conditions I'll come on to later. Yorkshire Water, I'd referred to, I think, in my report, but I think the issues they had, which were predominantly about tree planting on public sewers have all been resolved now, and they've confirmed that. Over the page, some additional conditions. So the first three are the three conditions the ecology officer has suggested. One about biodiversity enhancement, the second one about external lighting in relation to bats, the third for a construction environmental management plan for biodiversity, and then the fourth condition is some of the public highway needs stopping up. For those that know, the adopted highway continues down the side of Flair's nightclub, which is at the back of the new building, and that will need stopping up because that becomes part of the access to the new development and is within their site plan. So that does need stopping up. That condition ensures that happens. And then amended conditions, an additional plan for condition 2, the plans tab, slight changes to the delivery hours in relation to comments from the highways officer, who noted that pedestrianised areas in the city have more limited hours for deliveries, and that this was going to make it quite hard for the development. So these have been slightly extended. You can see the highlighted area. We've slightly extended the delivery hours to make it more functional for the future development. And changes to condition 42, again, highways issues around access for phase 1, which is the archaeological dig phase. So to make sure that parking drop off for visitors and staff during that phase is suitably addressed. I think I'm there. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a number of speakers who've registered, and some of those are joining us by Zoom, others here in person. The first of those is Johnny Hayes, who's joining us by Zoom. Johnny, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Johnny, you know how this works, so 3 minutes and you have the opportunity to address the committee.
Thank you. In February 2021, the previous application was described as the largest development in York since Victorian times and was soundly refused. My view, and that of many other York residents, was that this would become one of York's most hated buildings. Now we have a resubmission with 2 towers. The problem seems in many ways to have doubled rather than being reduced. This proposal fails to preserve or enhance the conservation area by introducing a scale of structure which does not respond positively to its context. The new building would, as a result of its scale and massing, harm the character of York's central historic conservation area and the setting of listed buildings. Now, these are not my words, but the words chosen by the Planning Committee in 2021 for refusing the previous application. These are not minor reasons for refusal, they're fundamental reasons, but nothing fundamental has been altered or reduced, and the primary concerns remain the same, and the significant harm to archaeology remains totally unaltered. But not only do the sins of the previous application remain, the public benefit of this submission seems to have reduced still further, with no affordable housing contribution at all. The speculative, in my view, underground visitor centre is presented by York Archaeological Trust as the significant public benefit. But as joint developer with the ambitious projections and downplaying of significant harm to archaeology, this development needs to be seen in that context. York Archaeological Trust are joint developers. For this committee to make a viable decision on this development, it needs the financial viability assessment. This resubmission seems to have substituted the Section 106 contributions to support its much needed archaeological partner to get this over the planning line. These these reports should be published in full or in an aggregated form that would allow members to judge the viability of this development.
Seconds.
The council's own commissioned FVA suggests that there are significant concerns about the viability of the development as a whole. I have raised this as an official complaint as I believe this is unlawful and should be in front of members tonight. No decision should be made until all the facts are known. Either refuse or defer. Thank you.
Thank you. You were spot on your 3 minutes. Well rehearsed.
Thank you.
Councillor Cobain?
Just a question for the public speaker.
Indeed.
Hi, Johnny.
Hello.
Still there, good. Can you tell me what material difference you think publication of the full financial viability assessment would make to the decision-making process of this committee?
Well, how without that would you rely on that executive summary? Because the executive summary was described by the Rougier Street development people as being inadequate as a basis for making a decision. There is no way that you could make a decision on either of those two executive summaries. You need to have the full facts. The full facts are far more complicated than ones that can be described in a couple of sentences. And it is utterly, well, it's not acceptable for you to make a decision on that basis. And this is backed up by recent case law, the Holborn Studios versus Hackney Council. It's made perfectly clear, and the guidance has not been updated. And I think that the planners are behind the times. I think they need to get up to speed.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Eyre.
I think it was the same question Councillor Cobain asked, and I'm not sure whether it was answered or not. I think the question being, what do you think, Johnny, would change if we saw the full FVA? Would it be a suggestion that there could be affordable housing? Or what precisely do you think that the FVA should be challenged around? One would change?
Well, that would, I think you wouldn't be able to give an answer to that until you saw the full viability assessment, because the executive summary of the commissioned report by the City Council makes it perfectly clear that there are significant concerns, and the significant in bold capital letters, and that it makes assumptions that there are considerable concerns about the viability of the whole scheme. And to make a decision without that viability assessment is, well, I think not actually legal and against guidance which has been passed through a court.
Okay.
Thank you.
Don't see any other questions. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, also on Zoom, Flick Williams. Can you hear us? Can you join us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Excellent. Please go ahead and address the committee.
I am astonished to read section 5.154, which states a full equalities impact assessment is not required. Really, why is that? Not only does this involve significant changes to the public realm, but part of it is to be museum space open to the public and in part targeted at the education sector, with classrooms for school parties and small event space to the rear of the construction. Didn't we learn just last month about the importance of EQIAs for museum space? For the NRM, we eventually got a chapter and verse assessment of every aspect of accessibility for the Central Hall project from every impairment perspective. So why not here? Moving on, the architect's submitted access statement is not what I recognise as being the comprehensive document one would expect to accompany a planning application of this magnitude. Apart from a few thin statements about Part M compliance, a statutory requirement, and a brief nod to BS 8300 in reference to door opening widths and turning circles, nothing. But we do learn in 3.38 that since the last reworking, the flats are now below the national space standards. So if you have a mobility aid, don't be needing much furniture. Where, please, is the assessment of the accessibility of the museum as measured against the best practice guidance of the British standards? Under section 7.6.4, I find the attraction will be fully accessible to all with a series of lifts and ramps integrated throughout the landscape and internally to meeting building regulations part M. This in itself tells me that no member of the National Register of Access Consultants has been engaged on this project. Access is about so much more than ramps. Am I supposed to be reassured by the introduction which says Eber Arkham will provide a world-class visitor attraction? How about the wayfinding, the acoustics, the lumen levels, the reflective values of materials used, the colour contrast, the dimensions and fit-out detail of the accessible toilets, dimensions of lifts, height of reception desks, all absent? What I do have to go in is the artistic impressions, and they concern me. BS 8300 says revolving doors should be avoided, as should open riser staircases. To find this, I've waded through pages and pages of reports concerning sustainability, heritage, archaeology, flood risk, conservation, skyline, and. So why have actual people and their ability to use this building and its surround been given so little priority in this plan? More weight has been given to the storage of bicycles. This planning committee should also have learned, hopefully, not to be reassured that all the detail will be sorted later than to be told it is too late to change anything. Please let us not build any more inaccessibility into our city of the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do stay with us. There are one or two questions. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Flick. Sorry, there's quite a lot there in those 3 minutes. Can you mention something about problems with revolving doors and risers in terms of accessing from the outside of the building? Can you explain a bit more about that, what the problem, what the issues are there? You also talked about the flats being below minimum standards and would not be very usable by people with disabilities. If you could expand on that as well. And also you covered the access statement. You said it was, you seem to indicate it was inadequate. Could you explain what you meant by that for me? Thanks.
Yeah, I could. Okay, a lot there. So if we start then with the exterior of the building, I've got 4 main kind of problems with that. And the first one is the stepped only access from the Tanner Row end of the building. That's not best practice, and it would involve many people having to go the long way round, which is just unacceptable. So when it comes to revolving doors, let me quote from BS 8300. Revolving doors are not considered accessible. Basically, it says, for these reasons, automated door systems that do not require segregation of certain user groups are preferred. Where they are used, there should be an alternative. And I see from the plan, there only is one door to the right-hand side looking from the inside of the building outwards. There should be one on the left-hand side as well, so that both revolving doors have an alternative. So that's revolving doors. So if I could just still stay with outside for a moment. Second, we've got the issues around the public transport infrastructure. Now, the application describes bus infrastructure as street clutter, which it most certainly is not. The plan shows a reduction of bus shelters from 3 to 2. And I suggest that's more about the development's curb appeal than anything else, because the BSIP, the Bus Service Improvement Programme, is aiming for a 35% increase in bus usage by 2030. So more buses equals more passengers, equals more need for infrastructure and shelter, not less. But having accused bus shelters of being street clutter, we then see trees and huge planters taking up pavement space, which will impede access and egress of pedestrians, as living streets elsewhere have shown. So in the planning application, there is a diagram of the flats. There's two together, which shows them furnished. If anybody's looked at those, I mean, really, if you have any kind of mobility aid, as I say, don't expect to have any furniture because they are tiny. The space standards in the UK are much smaller than in Europe in any case. So to accept a plan that where they're actually below the very small minimal UK standards, I think is just unacceptable. We should be building buildings that are accessible to all. So I also have a number of issues with the whole layout of the external aspects of the building. So the newly created attraction street, well, for a start, I don't think you can call it a street if people can only access it from one side. And the space around the Tanner Moat end of it is very confused. It's supposed to be a shared space in part of it, but delineated between pedestrian and cyclists in another. And yet, from again looking at the plans, the cycle storage is shown on the pedestrian side of that divide. So that's already sort of asking for conflict, it seems to me. And if the risk between pedestrian and cycling conflict is too great in the foot streets, why is kind of shared space okay here? I think that was everything you asked.
I think you picked up the point that were the questions that were asked. Are there any other questions? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we move on in person to Ken Smith, who I understand wishes to speak on behalf of the Council for British Archaeology. Ken, do make sure that the button is pressed there for the green light on the what looks like a Wi-Fi symbol.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Chair of Trustees of the Council of British Archaeology, CBA, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee at the Peak District National Park Authority, and formerly Cultural Heritage Manager at that authority. The CBA was established in 1944 to promote engagement with and understanding of the country's archaeology within the context of rebuilding Britain. This proposal relates directly to CBA's core charitable purposes, promoting archaeology and the benefits to society from archaeological investigations. The principle that archaeological excavation develops our knowledge, understanding and public enjoyment of York's distant past is well founded. However, CBA considers the rationale, methodology and policy considerations of this scheme to be fundamentally flawed. If departure from policy is appropriate to facilitate large-scale excavation within York's designated area of archaeological importance, then the timescale and funding must be sufficient to ensure the benefits for research, participation and knowledge gain will be delivered. Claimed public benefits from the archaeology are used to justify an overscale building, resulting in overdevelopment of the site, creating a mass cutting across the human scale of the city and causing significant harm to the character and appearance of the central historic core conservation area and its building settings, paras 3:10 to 15 of your report. It's therefore contrary to Section 72 requirement of Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act of 1990 regarding preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of conservation areas. Putative archaeological discovery and the speculative visitor attraction do not constitute the clear and convincing justification required by NPPF paragraph 200 for this level of harm. Creation of a visitor attraction is not clear and convincing justification for the proposed level of substantial archaeological harm, i.e. destruction. The CBA is extremely concerned by the proposed approach to this site's archaeology and how this application pivots on the public benefit claim for archaeological excavation and the creation of a Roman visitor attraction as part of the development, acknowledged in para 6.6 of your report as being a finely balanced decision. CBA considers the Planning Committee needs to satisfy itself, amongst other considerations, that the estimated public benefits from this scheme are sufficient and sufficiently accurate to override policies relating to archaeology and conservation areas in the NPPF and the Council's own planning policies, that it's acceptable that the archaeological strategy for this site is predicated on the speculative development of a visitor attraction rather than the appropriate application and consideration of policy.
30 seconds.
That the scale and massing of the building is justified by the once-in-a-generation excavation of the archaeology, and that the proposed methodology, timescale, 2-year excavation, and funding are adequate to deliver what is proposed. If there's any doubt that these issues haven't been resolved and a fully informed decision is therefore not possible, the CBA considers that planning permission should not be granted. CBA considers that these issues have neither been adequately nor appropriately addressed.
Thank
The
you.
CBA objects to this application and recommends refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There may well be questions. There are questions. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming to speak to us this evening. So you've mentioned the timescale and the funding must be sufficient. What I appreciate this in a way is asking how long is a piece of string, but were that site to be as important as it's suggested that it could be, what do you think might be a realistic timescale to excavate that sort of a site? Is 2 years sort of way off the mark, or is it something that?
I could only quote back to you your comment that it's asking how long is a piece of string. I mean, fundamentally, we don't know what lies underneath that ground, what condition it's in, what it represents, and therefore whether it's waterlogged still, whether the anoxic conditions still exist, to an extent that there is significant waterlogged areas. We don't know. Therefore, with the best of respect to colleagues who I do respect, I think it's a stab in the dark.
Okay.
And again,
and if I may, in terms of what is potentially there in the ground, and I know this is a debate that goes on within archaeology, and you know, you'll be far better versed in it than I, but I suppose there's a balance between leaving things in situ and exposing them so we can learn more about them, but also where there's organic material in waterlogged conditions, whether that material decomposes or degrades over time, and whether or not there's a sort of a point at which you should get it out or preserve it or not. And I just wondered what your thoughts were really on that, because I imagine that will be an argument that will be put to us, which is that actually this is the only opportunity we'll ever have to see what there is there and preserve what there might be.
I think it would be fair to say that from the CBA's perspective, the most appropriate way forward would be an evaluation of the site once those buildings have been dropped, to establish what there is, where it is, what condition it's in, and therefore what might be the most appropriate methodology for dealing with it. Now, I acknowledge that there are difficulties in that approach because they are extant buildings, but nevertheless, that is the where we are at the moment. It seems to me, it seems to the CBA, is that we don't know, and therefore it is speculative, and it is not appropriate to address what is designated archaeology. It's in an area of archaeological importance. There are only 5 in the whole country, and we collectively, nationally and locally have policies to deal with these things in an appropriate way. And it seems to CBA that the policies that we have nationally and locally aren't being applied. Now, if they are applied, Our case would be that there is a methodology that needs to be followed. And that will lead us to an appropriate response to the conditions and the content of the material that is there, undoubtedly there, but we don't know in what condition, we don't know what is there. I think I'll stop.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre and then Councillor Fenton.
It's all right. The good news is Councillor Crawshaw asked my question almost word for word, so I don't need to now.
Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking in the report at the comments of the council's archaeological officer, there's reference to further archaeological discussions needing to take place regarding additional post-determined evaluation and flexibility to the proposed scheme. Does that kind of phrasing give you some comfort in terms of, obviously you were clear about the sort of the stab in the dark analogy in terms of, you know, regardless of what will be found, you've got 2 years to sort it. Does that wording from the council's own archaeologists give you some degree of assurance that that there will be and should be flexibility depending on what is unearthed?
Yes, insofar as it tries to reflect the fact that we don't at this stage know what's there or what condition it's in. Therefore, there needs to be flexibility, if this was approved, built in to deal with the extremes if the anoxic conditions still hold. Though I understand that the borehole data from 2018 shows significant deterioration from the conditions in 1980, but we don't know for sure whether the borehole information, for example, is a reflection across the entirety of the site, or whether it's specific to those areas where the boreholes happen to be.
Councillor Kilbane.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you. Obviously, for lay people, this is a very difficult decision to make. Can you help us in any way by how do you account for this fundamental difference of opinion between the Council for British Archaeology and the York Archaeological Trust? Because you seem to be at different ends of the spectrum here, and I'm just wondering how that can be when you all work in the same sort of field, really. No pun intended.
Yes, it can be quite a muddy field on occasions. I wouldn't want to speculate, but Mr. Hayes made the point that the trust is part of the development process. The CBA is on the outside looking in and is addressing the issues that it sees as being the most relevant in these circumstances. I think there is what could be seen as an old adage that the best way of creating an argument is putting two archaeologists in a room. I'm not suggesting that's necessarily the case, but there are always going to be differences of opinion, as there are on the design of the building from the objections and others that have come in. I think what CBA tries to do is to stand back and take an objective view of what is the in the context of designated heritage assets, which are those features within the area of archaeological importance, what is the most appropriate way forward? And I think, depending on where you're coming from, there is always going to be room for some difference of opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for letting me just come back one more time. In a way, you've just teed me up nicely for my question, which again, I appreciate is going to be a matter of opinion, but the report that we have before us quotes MPPF as saying that harm to or loss of significance of a designated heritage asset requires clear, convincing justification. Substantial harm to assets of the highest significance, including scheduled monuments, should be wholly exceptional. And so, would it be correct that your assessment would be that we should be treating this as an asset of the highest significance?
Yes, because it's in an area of archaeological importance. It's one of only 5 across the country. I think that designation reflects the national importance, perceived national importance of the archaeology in York and the other 5 AAIs. I think we made the case in our submission that if there are waterlogged remains, if the anoxic conditions still hold, then that makes those areas of international importance. So, yes.
No further questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, in person, Lawrence Beardmore, President of the York and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce.
Good evening. I also run York Emporium, which is a coffee roasting company, which I set up a long time ago. It was sold a while back, so I run a business in New York. York and North Yorkshire Chambers of Commerce fully support the revised plans for the exciting Roman Quarter projects on Rougier Street. Following issues raised during the previous planning meeting, the developer partners have worked hard to ameliorate those concerns and have significantly redesigned plans for the development. We believe the newly updated plan, if approved, will play a significant role in York's future economic growth. At a time when support to our beleaguered businesses, especially in the hospitality sector and retail sectors, will be most needed. It also provides a major opportunity to positively regenerate a key area of the city to a high quality mixed use development. In contributing to York's economy, the briefing paper forwarded to this committee reported a 315 million boost to the local economy over 30 years, as well as 500 jobs for local people. This analysis has been provided by an independent economic consultancy. The total figure includes direct spend of visitors, jobs created, and wider benefits from attracting more visitors. In terms of current local businesses, having a new attraction here will help cafes, restaurants, hotels, shops, and bars. It's also a major regeneration project that will boost Rougier Street area businesses, especially those close by. The developer partners have the support of many of those local businesses who have expressed support for the project. With regard to office space, I recall concerns at the last committee meeting regarding the jobs and office space of Northern House. And I'm aware that now that all occupiers of Northern House will end their lease by the end of the year. Atkins have already relocated to West offices. Network Rail and Northern Rail are both looking to relocate within York in other offices. So Northern House office space is now sort of outdated and not fit for modern use. It will be vacant by the end of the year. Regardless of this planning application, it needs to be repurposed and already has permitted development rights to convert the existing building into flats. The new planned 25,000 square foot of Roman Quarter office space will be a modern grade A space. Office occupiers are looking for quality over quantity now, especially with the work from home dynamic that's coming after the pandemic. Offices are often now working hubs and not full-time working spaces. The development on Hudson Quarter is a good example of this change. It's nearly fully let now and is showing considerably high demand for this new type of office space. Prior to York Central coming online, there is very little new office space available in York or even planned.
Thank you.
Contribution to York's culture and attractions.
If you could wind up, please.
Sorry?
If you could wind up.
Oh, right. Okay. Beg your pardon.
Sorry, I didn't give you 30-second warning, but
sorry. In summary then, the Roman Quarter plans have the overwhelming support of the business community and our members throughout York. It will be a massive help to the city's economy and local businesses in these challenging times. A once-in-a-generation opportunity that should be seized, a massive investment in York and an ambitious project.
Thank you. Don't rush. There might be
Sorry.
questions. I don't see any. Councillor Crawshaw?
Just a quick one, and I just want to go back to the figures that you quoted right at the start. So you said it would be 315 million over 30 years. So about 10 million a year.
Yes.
Do you happen to know? Because I'm trying to recall from the back of my mind what the GVA for York is overall. It's
Yeah,
4.8
4.8 billion.
billion.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I make that about 0.2%, 0.02%, sorry, of GVA.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to sort of balance the need for this to be wholly exceptional for the harm that is caused to the archaeology versus the, undoubted good. So I just wondered what I mean, you obviously, you've sort of talked a lot about the benefits, but just in terms of that context of actually, is it that significant to the city? I appreciate it's significant to Rougier Street. Absolutely, it's a street that needs investment. I don't think anybody would doubt that. But I'm just trying to give you some hooks, perhaps, to give us a sense of how exceptional it might be.
We think it's exceptional because it's one of a number of things that we have to do in the city. We can't just sort of put a hat on one hook. That GVA has been built over many, many years, and it's been built by businesses coming into York, by attractions coming into York over a number of years. It's a cumulative GVA. It doesn't happen overnight, and we have to keep adding to the city. We have a number of projects coming up over the coming years, hopefully, and this is an important one, as is York Central, National Railway Museum, and a host of others that we can describe. So it's a sort of a cumulative effect as opposed to pinning it on one.
Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Thank you. Just picking up the point you made around the office space, which will be vacant by the end of the year, and how that could, under permitted development rights, be turned into flats. Just to clarify my understanding, obviously, and there've been a number of former office buildings in York that have been repurposed in that way. So is my understanding correct that the office space could be converted into flats without planning permission? Is that how it would work?
I can't answer that. I don't apologize. I don't know the answer to that.
Just
we can pick it up with officers later, maybe.
Just on that,
Yeah,
an
go ahead.
application went in 2 years ago, I think. It didn't require planning permission, but an application went through to be able to convert it into residential.
You may want to pick that up later for any clarification. No further questions. Thank you very much. Again, in person, Dr. Nick Rowe.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for
Good afternoon.
inviting me. My name's Nick Rowe. I'm a director of Converge at York St. John University, offering courses to local people who use mental health services in the city of York. And we run a whole range of courses that take place in the university at Fospark Hospital and in Clarence Street. So we're very interested in the value of education and so on. So I'm only here to speak to you about the value of the Archaeology on Prescription project that YAT have developed and our engagement with it, and the value that we've observed it bringing to local people with mental health problems in the city. We did quite an extensive piece of evaluation over the last year of the impact on people in the city with mental health problems who are engaged in the project. And there seems to be clearly a general improvement in people's mental health through the process of being engaged, which is related to, according to the people that we spoke to their absorption in the task. One person said, I love the concentration. It keeps me from worrying. I'm focused on what I'm doing, not what I'm thinking in my head. Crucially, and this is really important and I think needs more research, a sense of belonging, belonging to a team who are doing the dig, but also belonging to their city, which I think is a very interesting idea, putting their hands into the soil of their city and feeling that they belong here. I think that's a crucial aspect of it. And the third thing is value that's come through to people is sense of achievement, contribution and discovery. And there's a wonderful story of a gentleman that we know well who who discovered an Edward III gold coin on the Walgate dig. And it was that moment of discovery, that moment of achievement, of course, is very important. So I'm not speaking here about, you know, necessarily the value of this particular project, but only sharing with you the value of people being able to engage in archaeology who wouldn't ordinarily have that opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Are there any questions? No, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, in person, Kyo, with others available via Zoom, I understand. Eamon. Okay, I understand all four of you registered to speak. Is that still your intention?
Yeah, can I explain, Chair? If I
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't intend to say very much, unusually. The main speakers are going to be Neil Brown, who will talk of design issues, James Fry, who will talk about the apart hotel and the management of the scheme and the apartments, and David Jennings, who will talk about the archaeological aspects of the scheme. So I just intend to coordinate the questions to our team, and also to coordinate. We have several speakers online. We have Timur Tatadliou from Montague Evans, who will answer questions on heritage as and when necessary. And we have Andy Walker from Dudley's, who will answer any questions that people might have on drainage or flood risk.
Okay,
so they're available. And there's also Sarah Maltby from York Archaeological Trust, who's available to answer questions that people might have on the management and running of the visitor attraction. But the three registered speakers are James, Neil, and David.
Okay, and each of you are going to speak in turn?
They're each going to speak in turn for 3 minutes as by way of introduction. And as I say, Chair, I don't have much to say. I do have one update to give you, if I can be allowed that as part of the 3 minutes.
Okay, give me a moment. Councillor
Just on a procedural point, and showing my age as someone who's been on the planning committee, I think for 15 years, we have never in history, I think, allowed the applicant to register more than one person to one slot to speak. There have been on occasion where chairs, for various reasons, have extended that 3 minutes to perhaps 5 minutes, given the number of speakers against, to allow a sense of balance. That I could see, but I've never known in all of those 15 years, 9 minutes being given to an applicant. And I fear if we do this here today, we will have every single applicant on every single application coming forward, registering up to 5, 10, 15, 20. I have absolutely no objection to as many of them wishing to speak as they want to do, but they should not be given 3 minutes. I don't believe our constitution allows them to be given 3 minutes each, and it's never happened previously.
I take your point, Councillor Rare, and I'm concerned that we don't set some unhelpful precedent. These meetings are generally long enough. I think it is helpful that you're all present. I'm not sure it would be helpful to have 3 minutes each. I think that if you can condense that contribution into a 3 minute, I'll give you a little more than 3 minutes, but let's say a maximum of 5 between you. And then, of course, plenty of opportunity for any questions that committee members might want to ask. Does that sound reasonable?
I take the point, Chair. Yeah, I don't want to be creating, as you say, precedents that could cause difficulty for the council leader.
Yes.
Can you just give me 1 minute to talk to
Okay,
Yeah.
I will be lenient in the circumstances,
Yeah,
but I
sure.
won't be too lenient.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. No, I appreciate the circumstances. Just, so I just want to do a quick update to paragraph 5.9 in the report, which states that there's 500 people working in the office space. That's not currently the situation. The office is slowly being vacated. Some occupiers have already left. There's probably about 200 people now during the week come into the offices, and on Mondays and Fridays that's reduced to about 75. And by the end of the year, all the significant occupiers will have left all the premises in the city. With that said, Chair, can I start by asking Neil Brown to describe some of the key aspects of the design? Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and members. Neil Brown of York-based architects, Vincent and Brown, and local residents. When the original application was refused early last year, we listened carefully to criticism from this committee, which essentially boiled down to three main points. The proposed structure was too monolithic. It would not respond positively to its context, and it would fail to preserve or enhance the conservation area. Since then, we have worked tirelessly with the Council's design and conservation team and several of York's major stakeholders to address those concerns, which on reflection had merit. On agreement with your officers, a major change in design direction was made, including a significant reduction in the above ground building mass, the introduction of two building forms, as well as reductions in scale towards both Tanner's Moat and Tanner Row. When combined, these positive changes will significantly improve daylight penetration across the site, successfully mitigate Rougier Street's canyon effect, and distinctly enhance the pedestrian experience. As recognised by your officers, the new proposals will also integrate successfully into its context and meet the criteria outlined in York's conservation area appraisal. Significant public realm improvements are also included, introducing new, accessible and inclusive green spaces to all sides of the development, each area combining to create a distinct destination and strong sense of place. The development will activate the locality and unite future neighbouring areas such as York Central, the new station front master plan, and the upcoming revitalisation of Coney Street and the Riverside. Finally, we've worked collaboratively with members of the Civic Trust, CAP, and your design officers throughout the last 18 months, getting support from across the city. And we will continue to work with them on the building's finer detail, its strategic influence on the wider area. And we trust members will uphold your officer's recommendation to approve this application. Thank you.
I think David will stay just a minute or two on archaeology. Thank you.
Right. Well, good evening, Chair and members. The project has three main heritage components: excavation, public engagement programme, and attraction. The excavation is proposed for four main reasons. First, it's in an archaeologically rich area. Secondly, having undertaken major excavations nearby, we will build an understanding of a far wider zone of the Roman city. Thirdly, the public's ability to see and take part in excavation increases their support for the conservation and promotion of archaeology. Finally, we know so little of the Roman city. For example, we do not know the location of a single major Roman public building from York. Our public engagement programme, running alongside the excavation, will be the largest and most inclusive ever to take place in York and probably the UK. Every school child in York will be able to visit for free and do projects with artists or scientists, or have live stream sessions broadcast into their classroom. We will use the dig to improve people's health and well-being, building on our national award-winning Archaeology on Prescription programme and working in particular with the disadvantaged, disabled, or those with mental health issues. Operating Jorvik over the past 38 years, we know that we can excite people about the past and 20 million visitors can't be wrong. We know we can capture imaginations and create an experience that stays in people's memories. With over 500,000 visitors a year, Archeological will make significant economic benefits, support York's cultural strategy, and strengthen its rich cultural offer. In conclusion, the Roman Quarter is not focused on maximisation of short-term profit, but focused on the delivery of the maximum public benefits from York's rich Roman heritage. It's a wholly exceptional, once-in-a-generation, sustainable opportunity, locally developed with global reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it possible that we draw a line there? That's spot on 5 minutes.
Yes, yeah, Chair, we're happy to stop there, and James is available to answer questions.
But
if anyone has better
there will be
time.
many questions,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
there
I
will.
realise there are others
Sure
who
there
were
will.
available.
Yeah.
There were a lot of hands that went up, but I saw Councillor Wood be first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming to speak. One of the speakers mentioned about accessibility and alternative accessibility. I was wondering if you could explain a bit about that, please.
Yeah, I presume you're referencing the issues around disabled access. Yeah, thank you. That's been central to the whole development of the scheme. And I think both Neil and David can explain that in some detail. I think if Neil wants to start on the design, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodby. Just so members are fully aware how the ground floor of the scheme works, because of the need to mitigate the 1 in a 100-year flood, any ground floor new development needs to be raised above, fairly significantly above the street level. In this instance, it's probably, when you look at that plan, it's probably about 1.5 metres down at the Tenors Moat end, and very, very little at the Tenor Row end, because the ground, the gradient goes up towards Tenor Row. So that presented a number of challenges in terms of accessibility. And one of the reasons, it's one of the reasons we've pushed the building back from the street to provide a significant public realm, as you can see from that diagram. Equally, you can see on the top of the plan, the street, the new Tenor Street, or the new Roman Road, as it's called, that provides significant public realm space as well. That gave us the ability to introduce ramps, both from Rougier Street, the main access point from Tanner's Moat down to the attraction, which is the way we want to bring visitors, and access on Tenor Row, which I think was one of the points that Flick made, is actually within the building. So you can come into the building, there are lifts internally, and that will take you down to the level beneath. There is a practical reason at the top of, you see the top right of our plan, adjacent to Flair's nightclub. You need to get vehicles down there for access to the back of Aviva and to service Flair's nightclub as well. So that needs to be level. It just wouldn't give us the room for a ramp. But there is another reason that a ramp isn't there, and I think I'll probably hand over to David to explain that from an operational point of view.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think in terms of that concern about access, the attraction, the aim is for the attraction to be entered either through the glass atrium in the middle or via Tanner's Moat. And actually, one of the issues with the design of attractions is that you have clear signage and clear route into a building. Because particularly once you get large volumes of people, what you don't want are groups of people, particularly like tour groups, milling around, not knowing how to get in. So in terms of the concern, in terms of access down those stairs, we wouldn't want anybody to be entering the attraction coming down those stairs. They're actually supposed to be coming through the glass atrium or via Tanner's Moat. We recognise the concern, but we think it's a misunderstanding of the scheme. As Neil said, also, just would like to emphasise that for what we've called the Roman Road, putting a ramp in there would significantly impede into that space, which is a space that we see as being very active and actually the beginning of your experience of the attraction. So keeping that space open is actually beneficial in terms of creating a dynamic attraction before people go inside, and a ramp would significantly impede that.
A number are trying to attract my attention. If your question is effectively a supplementary to this, yeah, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to challenge you on that. I think the city does have cases of really good examples of integrated architecture around accessibility. And why can't it be done here? There seems to me like there's plenty of space if it were creatively thought about. And I just don't think that we should be building in inaccessibility on any side of the building. We need to move beyond this. You know, we need to become a modern city where everybody has equal access. And at this point, I feel as though a lot of people feel that's not the case. So please explain to me why you feel it's appropriate to not make it accessible from all directions.
I think, as I explained, for us, the issue is about having a clear way to the attraction, so that when people visit, they know which way to enter. We don't particularly want large groups of people coming down Tanner Road to enter the attraction. The attraction entrance is seen from Tanner's Moat or via the glass atrium. So it's not a case of trying to prevent people coming in that way. It's a case of trying to be clear about how you get into an attraction, about signposting the way that people come into a building. And that's a significant issue for most attractions. If you think about your own visit to any museum, you come in via a set of not prescribed routes, but clearly signposted routes. And that's the issue I'm trying to get across, that in this sense, it's not the main way into the attraction.
Could I just add to that answer, please? Just in terms of accessibility. So just so everybody's clear how it works. So the front from Rougier Street, there is a ramp up to the secondary entrance to the attraction, as with all of the entrances to each of the different uses in the scheme. On the left-hand side through Lendl Arches, that is level access. So everybody can come in through the two arches to a level ground floor, and then you've got platform lifts internally to get into the up to the ground floor level. And then from Tanner's Moat, part of the design of that street, as well as wanted to include parts of the Roman attraction down there, has all been designed around an accessible ramp. So that entire run from Tanner's Moat all the way down to the quite significant indent of public realm space is a ramp. That is accessible with the appropriate landing points from each end. The area around Tanner's Moat, as I said before, the ground rises quite significantly, probably about 1.5 meters from Tanner's Moat to Tanner Row. To get a ramp in that small area in the top corner just wouldn't be possible at all. So the option the option we've come up there with is direct access into the building and a lift down to the lower ground floor of the attraction. So each side of the development does have access. So I think there's probably a little misunderstanding of the plans.
Councillor Kilbane, was that your question as well? Or?
Yeah, I've just a bit of clarification on that, if you wouldn't mind. So if you enter via the Roman road to start your experience of the museum, and you get to that bottom bit where the stairs are, and you're in a wheelchair, how do you get into the museum from there? If you're right down you've gone all the way down, you're in the lovely Roman road, you're saying, oh, isn't this great? Then how do you get into the attraction?
So that where the red dot is there, that's level access at that point, because the plan beneath, that's a ground floor plan. The plan beneath is the lower ground floor. I don't know if you've got it there, Alison. The plan beneath is there you go. So that's the point at which you're down at the new ground or external level, which is level access with the inside of the building. So you go into the building, the idea is that you would circulate around to the lower levels and then come back up. The final exit for the building, which, as David explained, in terms of museum experience, the final exit is on Tanner Row, which is level with the street, and that's where everybody exits.
Okay,
probably through the gift shop.
So the disabled access is in that indented bit there.
It's all level at that point.
Yeah.
So the way down there is a ramp from the left to right on the plan. Yeah.
Is this supplementary, Councillor Crawford?
It is, yeah. Thank you, Chair. So that's accessibility if you have a mobility impairment. What other ways is the building accessible? Because obviously accessibility is about a lot of other things just than a physical mobility. So ramps will help if you're in a wheelchair, but not necessarily if you have sight loss. Or...
I think it's part of the part of the detailed design, I noticed in Flick's speech, she talked about tactile paving, the right handrails and those sort of things, and all those things are part of the detailed design stage, which will be conditioned should the application be approved. So those are things that with this scheme, since the refusal 18 months ago, we've been really keen to be collaborative and work with everybody across the city. And I'd be more than happy if Flick came in to see us and talk about those things in detail, and we can look to address them at the detailed design stage.
So I'll just note the point that Flick made, I think, which is the danger of agreeing to defer it and then being told further down the line that actually it's all been approved and there's no opportunity. But what you're saying quite clearly is that you'd be very happy to have that detailed level of conversation to ensure that all forms of accessibility are taken into account within the building.
Absolutely, yes.
Chair, could I ask Sarah Maltby to talk about the accessibility within the attraction? Sarah is responsible for the running of York Archaeological Trust attractions, including Jorvik. So she has a lot of experience in how people get in and out of museums and attractions, if you wouldn't mind.
You can understand this is an area of concern. And
absolutely, which is why I'd like her to speak.
The committee, I'm sure, would value that opportunity.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sarah Maltby. I'm the Director of Attractions for York Archaeological Trust, and I have been for the last 20 years been in charge of Jorvik and our various attractions. So what I would say is that access is at the very core of everything we do within our museums and attractions and our events, and our access to archaeology as well. And we've worked really hard in the last 20 years when I've been involved to make sure that not only are our activities accessible to those with mobility problems, but also with people with additional needs. So, for example, we do a lot of work with people with autism to make sure that all of our experiences are adapted for people with individual needs. We work very hard with other organisations in York and nationally. For example, people with sight impairments. We've worked with My Sight a lot in terms of our attraction Dig, to make sure that people who have sight impairments can take part as fully as people who don't have sight impairments. Hearing impairments the same. So we recognise, we certainly recognise that there is a vast range of disabilities that we need to be aware of, and that we make sure that everybody who comes to us can have the same sort of experience across no matter what we do. And as you heard Nick Rose speak earlier, we're working very hard in terms of our archaeology, which then runs into all our public engagement in our attractions, in terms of working with people with mental health issues. We're also working with the Hut, for example, who work with people with additional learning needs. We're working with the Blueberry Academy, the same. So we have made a concerted effort over the past 20 years to make sure that our accessibility in everything that we do is there, and there will be no difference. In fact, being able to design an attraction, a museum from scratch, which is something I've not personally had before, because I came into Jorvik sort of 20 years down the line, and we made it accessible as it is now. And as I say, it is award-winning now. So to be able to design a museum from the very start, where we're thinking about all of our audiences, is an incredible opportunity. And there is no doubt that we will not forget about all of the people who want to visit. We will, and we'll work hard to make sure that everybody can access everything that we're doing in that museum.
Thank you. I'm aware there were also questions asked by public speakers around accessibility issues and the size of space within the apartments, the apart hotel. Is it possible to hear something about that as well?
Yes. I think the speaker before mentioned that the apartments didn't meet national minimum space standards. They actually do, and I think it's mentioned in the report that each of the one beds as a minimum is usually 37 square meters. Ours exceed that, as do the 2 and 3 beds. The studio apartments don't have a national minimum space standard. I think it might be useful to bring James in to talk about the apartment sizes and how that works.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I'm just
one thing I'd like to say on the apart hotel side is we actually won't have a formal reception area. We'll have people entering with keyless entry. It's a problem for people in wheelchairs. Reception areas often they're built at sort of chest height and so forth, whereas we'll be using technology to enable people to access through the ground floor and go straight up to their rooms and straight to the restaurant bar, which actually on the 5th floor, which will be at one level. In terms of the mix of units in the service department building, so not on the apart hotel side of the developments, we've worked closely sort of with the developer to define the ideal mix of service departments to address the needs within the city for single and double dwelling accommodation, the target market of young professionals and couples, and really the sort of the lifeline of the city is the young population, the people who are going to work in the museum, the people who are going to work in the hotel, work in the restaurants and bars and so forth. And it's often an overlooked part. And really what they want is sort of functional, comfortable and modern space. They're often not spending that much time there. They're often out in the gym or socializing or at work. And that is one of the reasons we've sort of designed what we feel is the ideal mix of service departments on this particular site.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks. Just on that then. So the one-bed flats do meet national minimum standards, but the studio flats, which presumably are smaller than the one-bed flats, there is no national minimum standard.
National minimum standards. So the national minimum space standards start at one bedroom.
But the studio flats are just smaller than
the studio flat is the standard practice. Whilst these are service apartments, the standard practice is that studio apartments should be at least 30 square meters in order that people can actually get a mortgage. And whilst it's doesn't strictly apply here, that's how we've designed them. It is more or less one space apart from the bathroom.
Because 60% of the flats that you're providing are studio flats. So 60% of what you're providing is not meeting a minimum space requirement. I appreciate that a studio flat doesn't have a minimum space, but if the nearest that we have is a one-bed flat, is the nearest minimum space requirement, and these are smaller than a one-bed flat, and 60% of what you're providing is that type of accommodation.
Yeah, I'll perhaps bring James in again, but I would point you to the officer's report 5.109, where it says flat sizes are considered acceptable in this location.
Earlier in the report, I can't remember which consultant it is, at 3 point whatever. So paragraph 3.8, studio space is very small.
But it says that the studio spaces, I think, are small by nature. They're smaller than a one bed.
I think the problem I have is that you've got this apart hotel on one side, and then you've got on the other side something which 85% of, to me, screams short-term let, short-term, short stay accommodation. And I love your description of these sort of buff young people who can afford to buy a one-bed flat right in the centre of York. And I mean, I just don't think it's realistic. Surely your target market for most of this development is going to be short-term let.
I think it'd be useful for James to.
I think something we are going to do on this site is actually have sort of minimum of 3-month rental periods up to 3 years. So although the apart hotel caters for people who stay for 1 night, 1 week, 1 month, it's very much about mixing up the different lengths of stay. In the service department side, we're not looking to provide that level of management. There's a huge amount of marketing and so forth to bring that number of people into a building. The service department side is very much for people who are staying on average 18 months, although we want to offer the flexibility of being able to stay for shorter periods. It was mentioned earlier about the new way of working, the mobile workforce. People don't want to commit to something for long term. They don't know whether they're going to still be in the same job. They're often working in IT, in life sciences and so forth. So they may be moving around from office to office. So we give them that flexibility, and we actually roll everything into one, so they can either just pay their rent and pay everything else on top, or they can include the utilities in there, they can include the deposits in there, they can include cleaning in there. So they pay one amount and know exactly what that cost is as that part of their life, and then they can budget accordingly. So it is certainly not something that we are looking to do as an operator. We already have the apart hotel piece
to run and manage, and the restaurant and the gym and so forth. But one of the big benefits for the tenants of the service departments is they get access to all that. So they're not just sitting there going, well, I've got nothing to go to in the building. I can come over to a 1,500 square foot gym. I can go to a 5th floor roof terrace bar. And that's what these people want to do. They want to socialize and have spaces to go with their friends.
There are quite a number of people wanting to ask.
If I may, just a point of clarity, hopefully, it just be very, very quick, hopefully. So all of these apartments on the Tanner's Moat side then are not, you're not intending to sell? So they will all be retained and they'll be all be managed, and within the contracts of that, there will be minimum letting period of time, so it'll be minimum 3 months. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So can I just add
Please do.
On the mix of apartments, Chair, it's dealt with in paragraphs 593 to 596 of the officer's report. And I think the point, and it's been made in other applications, is that once we accept and the officers highlight that the scheme doesn't meet the kind of strict breakdown of unit types that the strategic housing market assessment outlines, the scheme has to be considered in its wider context. This is an appropriate site for high density, probably one of the most appropriate sites for high density living in the city, given that it's 2 to 3 minutes from the train station, literally next to a major bus hub. And that will inevitably mean that you do have a higher number of smaller units in the scheme. But this is balanced by proportion of larger homes and strategic sites in the local plan and larger sites in outer areas. You don't get this level of density of one-bed apartments in outer areas.
Okay, thanks. I'm aware that there were many members who are wanting to ask questions, and obviously the things have moved in a particular direction. Whilst we're on this subject, are there further questions, supplementaries? Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I have two, if that's all right. One of them is about what you're just saying about them being serviced apartments and the service fee kind of being included in the rent. So in terms of the affordable housing provision, would that service fee also be kind of reduced and made affordable, as well as just the rent portion of the monthly price?
There's no element of affordable housing in the service apartment mix. It's market level service apartments. I think
I thought I'd read that there was
the report that's set out in the report.
30 affordable fund. Oh, that's what it should be. Right, okay. My other question, in that paragraph you just quoted, 593, it talks about the need for sustainable communities and providing choice for all ages. Would you say that this scheme meets that policy?
Hi there. Yes, although I have referenced the younger workforce, which is certainly something is a great need of spaces to rent, close to public transport, close to places they work. This kind of spaces also works quite well for a range of people, for people who are living on their own, people who are moving out of home, people of elder age, who again want to be near to facilities within great cities like York, but also want to have some of the benefits of when you stay in a hotel. So you've got access to staff, access to concierge, access to 24/7 security, access to a restaurant and so forth. So we although the main market we believe will be for younger people who've left university, starting off in jobs and with only the ability to rent, we also believe that there will be a mix of tenants throughout the building.
Okay. Again, is this on?
How much do you expect the rents to be?
That is a moving feast at the moment. Varies on the size of a property, floor of the particular unit as well, and the services that are included.
Sure. That's not strictly a planning question, but Councillor Eyre, you put your hand up a long
I did, yes. I thought it was about 20 other people. This seemed to be Forester fans. Page 53 around the visitor numbers. So, as I've travelled the world and the country more, I think I've noticed that pretty much anybody who went to school around about my time or 5 to 6 years older and ever since has heard of the York Viking Centre. It seems to have been a standard school trip journey for pretty much every school across the country. That is now a huge success and is attracting, even with that amount of renown, 400,000 visitors a year. This report says you're expecting 500,000 visitors a year. That's a 25% uplift on what a significantly well-established, incredibly well-known museum is achieving. Where's the evidence for you will achieve that?
Leave that to
Start.
Well, I'll maybe start, councillor, and then I'm sure Sarah will chip in. I mean, I think so. The visitor numbers are based on looking historically back at York, because you say if you look at the visitor numbers for the York Viking Centre for the first 30 years of operation, the average was 550,000. It started off at something like close to 1 million, and then it's like all attractions. They kind of have a gradual curve, and you spend your time looking at the curve as to when you're going to refurbish. It's that sort of issue. We are now a very mature attraction, as you say. We're into the 38th year of operation, and we're at about 400,000. This attraction is nearly 3 times as big as Jorvik. And I would say that to us, we think therefore also the Roman period is one of the most popular periods for people to visit. And so looking at those factors, looking at the growth of tourism, of course, it's been impacted by the pandemic and other factors, but globally, tourism is still one of the fastest growing parts of or has been traditionally the fastest growing part of the world economy. You know, we think that's a modest sort of projection or a conservative projection for a brand new attraction for the foreseeable midterm operation of it. That's I don't know, Sarah, whether you'd like to add anything into that, or is that a sufficient answer?
Councillor Fisher?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we all know about the York Viking Centre. I've only been around it once. I don't go there now in case people think I'm an exhibit and try and keep me in there. What features do you think will make this new visitor centre so attractive? I mean, obviously you're going to be doing excavation. You may find it's next to a Roman road. It's a very good site for finding finds. And you've also got the Roman road that runs down to Tanham Moat. If you find significant finds, you know, archaeological basements, there might be a granary there, are you going to keep them on site and show them in situ as preserved? Or are you going to sort of basically strip the site and fill it with other attractions? What are you going to do to make this site so good that it can compete with the York Viking Centre?
I can.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Obviously, we haven't finalised the design of the museum. It'll depend on what we find. We expect to find exciting things. And as David said, the Roman period is a very exciting one. I love the Vikings, but I think the Romans are equally as exciting. The Romans is on the national curriculum, therefore we know that we will get school parties in. But what I'm really excited about is how we design the museum and how we make it different. Jorvik, when it opened in 1984, was entirely different. It was a new style of museum, hadn't existed before, and our challenge is to do that again. I think we can. We have ambitions to do things differently, to work, for example, with the residents of the city on how we design the museum, so that we build in people's so that they get an ownership of that museum. So from the outset, so they play a part in how we interpret the material. So it means something to everybody, so that the visitor mix that we get is a lot of residents. We know at Jorvik, our main visitor mix is nationally, it's regionally. Visitors that are local will come initially, and then they will bring their families back. What we want to do is really make this an attraction, a museum where people of York, people who live in and around York and work in York, want to come and be part of it. So yes, we don't know exactly what we're going to put into the museum yet. We've got an awful lot of experience. I've got an awfully experienced team that work very hard in doing it in a new way. So I'd say that. I'd also say, in terms of the visitor numbers, I've been in the sector for 35 years now. I've also launched and managed a couple of other large-scale museums in Rotherham and Halifax, both of which achieved over 500,000 visitors while I was there. And I would say that if we can do that in Rotherham and we can do that in Halifax, when we've got York, which is such a significant visitor magnet and has such a profile, then I think we should be assured that we can do it here. So it isn't just based on hearsay, it is based on my experience and the experience of the team that I work with.
Councillor, you want to come back on that?
It was a sort of along the same lines of the museum thing, I suppose. It was the same people. So I probably am old enough to remember, but I can't remember the actual Viking Centre initial excavation. But my recollection is I'm pretty sure that was the opposite way round about this. That was an approved scheme that was in process when the archaeological finds were made.
Yeah.
It was then halted to give you sufficient periods to do what
Correct.
you need to do.
Correct.
Which then allowed the building to continue afterwards. This is flipping it around and doing it speculatively. So I suppose my question is, hold on, I was going to ask previously that Councillor Crawshaw asked, if you get to that point where you realise it is significantly more significant, word, than you had realised, what is the situation and how will you work as partners if YAT think, no, actually we need to stop, this is far too significant, we need to row back, we need to take a further 3 years as CBA would perhaps want at that point. What pressure is there going to be on you from your partners to say, well, actually, no, we've invested a significant amount of money in this, we need to plough ahead and continue to build?
I think the question one is about one of programming, really, isn't it? I think, Councillor. I mean, I would say that the first thing to recognise about the 2-year programme is that because this will be run as something to which we want the public to be involved, to visit, it's going to be run 7 days a week. So in effect, your 2-year programme becomes 3-year. Because it's, you look at those, you add up 2 years of 2 weekends, you get another 200 days. So, or another, is that right? Something like that, yeah. So there's some flexibility there. If you think back to, and again, archaeologists could argue about this, and I'm sure Ken and Neil and myself could have lengthy discussions. I've spent a long time in the archaeological profession. I used to run a very large archaeological practice, Oxford Archaeology, that focused on very big infrastructure projects. The timings for this project are ambitious but doable. They're very pragmatically worked out. To me, there are things that we can do if we find things that need more work. So obviously we can do shift working, we can increase the amount of work we do. So I'm very confident that the 2-year program that we've got will be achievable. Absolutely confident. We have 30 years of experience of working on big infrastructure projects to achieve this objective.
The question was, if you find that it's going to take more than 2 years, what will you do?
The reality is it's about resourcing. So you increase the resourcing, you increase the time scale in which you've got to work. That's the reality. And obviously there are some, there are just mechanical calculations you can do on the volume of soil that has to be moved in a 30 by 30 meter box. And so the estimate is based on a long industry understanding of how much soil you can move in just in coarse terms. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Is that trying to give a straightforward answer to the question?
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. This is just sort of following on, really building on that point a little bit. I think it seems to me that there's a couple of fundamental problems here, which I'd appreciate your thoughts on. I mean, on the resourcing and on the timing issue, if you suddenly find that you've got to increase the amount of time by 50% or 100%, then you presumably have to increase the amount of finance as well by 50 or 100%, and the pressure that you'll have from your partners in the development, I think, would come to bear in that situation. But haven't you also got a massive paradox here, whereby in order for your museum to be as successful as possible, you want the finds to be as nationally significant as possible, and the more nationally significant that they are, the more we as a committee don't want you to go ahead with this, because we don't want you to cause harm.
I think it's a very complex question. I think the answer to that is that I'm not sure. In terms of the paradigm, I'm trying to work that one through in my head. I think how do you respond to that? The question is whether you see it as harm or whether you see it as the realization of value. So this is the big conversation that's really, I guess, underpins some of the concerns in the archaeological sphere. This debate between conservation as opposed to discovery. And actually, I think where we disagree with organisations like the CBA is, to me, York has had 30 years or more of very restricted archaeological investigation. There's been a lot of conservation and very little investigation. But archaeology, even as defined by the Valletta Convention, you know, the international convention that the government is signed up to, is a twofold discipline. It's conservation and it is also investigation and discovery. And so this project proposal for me is a balance. It's about taking some time to explore deposits, which are significant. But the question then comes down in the MPPF terms, will come down to a consideration of the level of, as the MPPF defines it, the level of harm. And that's a much more complicated sort of debate. Is that, I'm trying to give it straightforward, but it's a complex question.
No, if I may, Chair, and I appreciate that. And it is, you know, obviously you're experts in your field with you know, lots and lots of years experience, and we're sort of coming to this, and I appreciate that there's a balance within archaeology and all those sort of things. But, you know, there is also then, from our perspective, a set of planning legislation, which says that if there is archaeology, we have to treat it as a designated heritage asset, and anything that does anything to that is causing harm, and harm in a planning sense, not in a layperson sense, but that, you know, it's an understood thing. And the more important that is, the more harm, the more we have to weigh against that harm, and removing it, effectively destruction, no matter how carefully and methodically you remove it, it effectively is destruction of that asset that causes the most amount of harm. And so, you know, in terms of our job tonight is weighing the planning balance. And I just think you've got a paradox, because you want to sell us how wonderful this is and what great things are there. But the more you do that, the more we have to find even more reason for why, you know, there's a wholly exceptional, and it is the wording is wholly exceptional. It's not just a bit exceptional, it has to be wholly exceptional.
Well, I think this is where, again, I don't know whether, no, it's not yet. The issue though with the MPPF is, as you say, there are different tests for designated assets or non-designated assets. As you say, this is an area of the AAI, and there's a question therefore about what the AAI designation means. It's worthwhile knowing that it's a form of designation that is no longer active in terms of its use by Historic England. This is why there are only 5 areas, because it was written into a 1979 Act to enable investigation, not to prevent it. It was at a time when there was no developer funding and destruction of archaeology was taking place. So we could have a long discussion about the contextual nature of the AAI. But as you say, the question, therefore, of whether harm in the MPPF terms is permitted is whether the harm is substantial or less than substantial. The test is about whether the harm is substantial or less than substantial. The question then, in terms of how you assess heritage assets, and as we've done in our planning cases, you have to look at the specific, you have to do 2 forms of assessment: specific heritage assets that are known within the site, and we have to look at then at area-based assets. And so when you look at the specific based assets that we know are in this area, we can talk about a Roman road, and we talk about things that we've speculatively identified in the 1980s as granaries. And you can look at those assets and say, are they designatable assets in their own right? And you will find that there are in North Yorkshire 4 designated Roman roads. None of the Roman roads around York are designated. And you will find in the whole country there is one single, as a single asset designated Roman granary in Sevenoaks in Kent. Other than that, they are designated as part of a wider class-based asset, like a Roman fort, a granary inside a Roman fort. So when you look at those assets, the way we've assessed this is that there is harm, but it is the assets that are not designated or designatable. This is the footnote 63. When you look at the area-based asset, you then have to look at the level of harm. Is it substantial or less than substantial harm? Now, the reality is for an area-based asset, what is the area-based asset? So the area-based asset, you could say, is the AAI, which is a very big area. In our planning case, we said, well, okay, let's take a small area. Let's just take the south side of the river, which in the Roman period is often considered to be the civilian settlement. We'll call it the Colonium. If you look at that, you say, well, okay, the area of impact of our excavation will be 0.4% of the area-based asset. If you look at planning case law,
it will say to you that for harm to be substantial, it has to have almost, I think it's to have vitiated destroyed, basically to have destroyed the value of the asset. Now, 4.4%, I would contend that it's very difficult for us to totally destroy the value of the area-based asset. So this is why it's a complex argument, because it's both area-based and specific site-specific based. So while we're revealing significant things, I would say that we passed the test of the NPPF. And that was the case. And again, we have, the barrister Chris Kotowski looked at this and came to and obviously came to the same conclusion. It's a very big and complex argument, and I don't want to. I'm trying to respond fully to it, but
I think you responded very well.
Sorry,
and as helpfully as you can. So thank you for that. There are a number, I think, who still have questions around this. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. So earlier we heard that you're not following CBA methodology, which is an accepted methodology. Is that the case?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. And I'm not sure they would say it's a CBA methodology. They might say there's an orthodoxy in the discipline, which we've tried to apply to, which we have applied to.
So you are following CBA methodology, is that right then?
Well, I wouldn't say there's a CBA methodology. I would say there's an industry methodology.
So if we got a difference of opinion then, because the gentleman that spoke first of all from CBA clearly said that there was CBA methodology that wasn't being followed in this case, and I'm just trying to work out if it is or isn't, or if there is one even.
Well, in the industry, there are very well laid down procedures, which generally the standards and guidance are written by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, and we've complied with those. Those are the standards that you comply to.
So we've got a difference of opinion. Is that where we're coming down on this one?
I'm not sure if it's a difference of opinion or a misunderstanding, to be honest. I'm not sure the CBA would say that they are regulators of the, or even people who would write the codes of conduct for assessment of this kind of work.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'll come to you in a moment. Just to make members aware, when we do have the opportunity to ask further questions of officers, apart from the officers in the room, there are others who will be available to us, and that does include the City of York Council archaeologists, so there may be an opportunity to tease out something more at that point. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Just following on from that, really, and to ask you the same question that I asked the gentleman from the CBA. How do you account for the difference of opinion on this dig between York Archaeological Trust and the CBA?
Well, again, Councillor Kilbane, I think I've kind of alluded to this already. I think to me, as I say, we're very interested as an educational charity in the investigation, the exploration of the past and the public benefits that can be delivered from that. And I think, as I say, within the discipline, this debate about conservation versus investigation is one that's quite well rehearsed. And you will find numerous positions adopted with respect to conservation or investigation. As you say, you have objections from CBA and Historic England. We could also point you to the 10 letters of support we have from archaeologists from across Europe, and including the former head of archaeology for what is now Historic England, but was at the time called English Heritage. So we have a lot of support for the project and the way in which we're approaching it from within the discipline.
Thank you. It looks like we might have come to a point where we've covered questions around that, but I'm sure there are other questions, and there are members who indicated very early on that they had questions, including Councillor de Gorn. Do you still have that question?
Yes, it's on a different
exactly.
thing, but yes. On page 66 and 67, there's reference to the sustainable design and construction approach that's proposed. I'm aware, obviously, that there's reference here to our local plan policies, CC1 and CC2, which are already 4 years old. In terms of the city, we have an ambition to achieve zero carbon to tackle the climate emergency. And it seems that in spite of that, the objectives in this energy strategy that you have put forward is to see if you can scrape up as high as BREEAM excellent, when it's quite clearly stated that in paragraph 5.139 references to the decentralized energy and heat priority areas, which are it's identified as being within a heat priority area. So I suppose the question really is why you feel it's appropriate to have a 21st century development which is dependent on fossil fuels. Paragraph 5.140 says that the proposal is a central gas boiler plant, when you've got already committed to a mechanical heat and ventilation recovery, which is the sort of technology that would be appropriate if you were going for passive house standards. And I mean, particularly at this time, when we're talking about a cost of living crisis and an energy crisis, I just wonder why you're actually proposing to put forward a development which will depend on fossil fuels going forward and higher energy costs than would otherwise be achieved by a different strategy.
Well, Councillor, what I can say is that we are the scheme design in terms of energy usage has been designed within available technology. It's been designed having regard to policies within the draft local plan at the time the application was submitted. And I know those policies are under review now, but we do meet the policy requirements within the plan. Clearly, the scheme is several years from starting, a year or two away from actually starting on site. So there's clearly scope for improvement if better technologies do come along and make that feasible. But we've designed the scheme within the technology available, and in order to meet the policy requirements that we have in force in the city at the moment. And I think the officer's report confirms that we are meeting the policy requirements within the draft local plan.
So just on that, so you're saying the technology available, you have restricted your scope to what might already have been built somewhere else in the UK, rather than looking at best practice or elsewhere in the world where passive house technology is quite well established for large buildings of this nature, where you've got far less heat loss than you would have on an individual dwelling.
Well, all I can say about that is clearly with the focus on cost of energy at the present time, the developers will, I think the users of the scheme and the tenants of the scheme, people who are going to use it, will clearly demand the highest energy efficiency standards in order to minimize their running costs. I think that in itself will be a driver for the scheme to achieve the highest levels of energy efficiency.
Could I maybe just mention, because Beyond, which is a company I've set up and I'm CEO of, is actually, we like to say we're a sustainable company that happens to provide accommodation solutions. Our first and foremost thing is to provide low energy, low impact property or accommodation solutions. So one of the things we will be doing is working with the developer to build and fit out spaces to ensure they use low carbon intensive circular materials that are low in toxicity. We'll only use 100% renewable energy on the site. We will install a building management system that monitors, measures and manages energy usage. We'll use zero chemicals to clean the space, which makes it a much healthier space. We actually use something made out of water and salt that passes through electric current. And we use that on everything from floors to kitchen surfaces, which is totally toxic free. And we use ozone to clean the sheets and towels in the spaces. We are 100% one-time use plastic free, and we even go as far as paying our employees 110% of their public transport costs to encourage them to come to work by public transport. So we're committed to sort of providing future-proof accommodation solutions in the heart of York City.
So just to add to my questions of it, as I've referred to, it says a gas sent oil. I don't know whether you're expecting that to be converted to a hydrogen operation, or what happens when we switch to 100% renewable. Obviously, I'm not aware of any renewable gas technology that might be applied. And secondly, from looking at the detailed drawings, there's quite a lot of roof space with no PV. There's no reference in here to air source heat or ground source heat pumps when you're starting with a fresh site. Obviously, there's an area of the site which will be excavated for the museum, but there's also an area which would be an appropriate location for ground source heat. There's none of that seems to be referenced in this report.
Well,
It's being investigated and ruled out for whatever reason.
I'm just going to draw a line there. And I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a moment. Excuse me for doing so. But we are going to adjourn for a moment. So we're going to stop the live webcast for the moment. Can I ask members to adjourn just into the room next door? And we will return. Public. We've heard the sad news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. And in the light of that sad news from the palace this evening, I have discussed with fellow members of the committee and consulted with the vice chair appointed. We feel that it is appropriate that we discontinue the meeting at this time to be adjourned this evening. I'm sure you'll understand the thinking there. It's appropriate nevertheless, I think, that before we leave this room, that we do observe just a short time of silence together. I would ask you please to stand. Thank you very much. Thank you.